Hello, my name is Bea Cupin. You are watching Rappler, and this is Rappler Talk. In this edition of Rappler Talk, we will be diving into the world of diplomacy and international relations. Specifically, let us talk about how the Philippines, under President Ferdinand Marcos Jr.'s policy of friend to all and enemy to none, how we fared in our diplomatic ties. My guest today is the founder of WR Advisory Group. He is an assistant professor of the UANP School of Law and Governance. He earned his doctorate in international politics from the Fudan University in Shanghai. He is also a congressional research fellow, one of 24 experts who work closely with the Congressional Policy and Budget Research Department, of course, of the Philippine Congress. Suffice to say, he is an expert on geopolitics in Southeast Asia, the Philippines, and China. Please welcome Dr. Robin Garcia.
Hi, Bea. Hello, everyone. Good
Hello,
day.
Robin. Thank you for joining us.
You're welcome. I'm happy to be here. Happy to engage with the audience of Rappler.
Yeah. Let's dive right in. Let's talk about China. So, how is China to understand the Philippines now that we're a year and a half into the Marcos Jr. administration?
How is China? Um, you know, I, China has seen the sort of a new aggressiveness in its foreign affairs and foreign policy ever since President Xi Jinping came into power in 2012.
Mm,
The context of that is in the U.S. The U.S. was just recovering from the 2008 financial crisis, and there was a shift in power in China and in the Philippines. We just elected our a new president during that time, Noynoy Aquino, in 2010. So
mm,
2008 crisis, and then you have Barack Obama, and then you have Noynoy Aquino, and you have Xi Jinping. So that's in the span of just a few years apart. But
mm,
that was the political backdrop that really should be seen and understood at the time that China began its aggressiveness.
mm,
And it was because there was sort of a perceived material weakness of the US, so which was an
okay.
opportunity for China to pursue more aggressive power projections in the region, in the globe. So around that time when Xi Jinping came to power, if you look at
Mm,
his rhetoric, it's very aggressive, it's very aspirational. It's revival of the Chinese nation, revival of greatness, which was a clear
mm,
shift from the previous presidents, Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao,
mm,
who was more moderate and was more subdued in terms of foreign policy, because during that time the priority was economic growth. And to achieve economic growth, you don't necessarily, I mean, you create more friends, right? Instead
mm,
of
mm,
enemies.
mm,
But the at the time that the US was going down, 2008, of course, the US also recovered. China was also at the height of its economic sort of power. Right now, it's slowing down. But anyway, the point is, that's the type of China that we're dealing with. More ambitious,
mm,
more revivalist, more aggressive, um, and responding to the changes in global power as well. So as
mm,
it strengthens itself internally, as it changes its leader, it happened at the time that the US is also going down, and we're seeing an emerging multi-power world order. um,
mm,
and obviously in the Philippines we responded by filing a case,
mm,
but then the way we responded shifted along the
mm,
different presidents we elected.
mm. So the past 6 years under Duterte, there was much talk about that pivot. And then, yun nga, like I mentioned earlier, under President Marcos Jr., much was said. Well, that was in his first one, di ba? Friend to all, enemy to none. Ngayon naman, 1.5 years with Marcos Jr. as our chief diplomat in the country. How do you think China is understanding its relationship with the Philippines?
That's an excellent question, because I was just at the Singapore embassy this morning. I was telling
Mm,
them that the uh, um, the the President Marcos, people
mm,
thought that he was the China candidate,
mm.
uh,
Yeah,
but he apparently was not. No, he was
yeah.
widely expected to continue the foreign policy of President Duterte, which was more subservient to China, you know, despite the fact that we claimed to be independent, but we were not independent. Anyway, so um, a few months into the presidency of President Bongbong Marcos, obviously we've seen a clear shift towards the United States.
Yeah.
Revival of the U.S. Philippine alliance. So that's what we see now, and China is not very happy with that. And so, in terms of the way China is responding to that pivot, there's also been aggressively working in the cognitive domain. It understands
Mm-hmm.
that there is a cognitive dimension to foreign affairs. It's the
Mm-hmm.
same thing that the U.S. understands, but China is now more cognizant of that. It still needs to understand Philippine public opinion. There's not a lot of
Mm-hmm.
support. There's no legitimacy for China. There's no
Yeah.
moral support for China in the Philippines, unlike the U.S. But the point is, it's using sort of the instruments of state power before to propagate its
Mm-hmm.
own messages. So, for example, even the digital infrastructure of President Duterte was used to propagate pro-China
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
messages and narratives, right? So we've seen that. It's
Mm-hmm.
not just Dutertismo, but also pro-China narratives. So
Mm-hmm.
it's working in the cognitive domain, and right now we see that as well under the Marcos presidency. That's how China is responding, among the many ways that it's responding.
You talk about China perhaps not quite comprehending yet how to handle Philippine public opinion. We certainly will be talking about that because there have been a lot of more recent developments, especially with regard to the West Philippine Sea. But before that, you spoke about China's revivalist foreign policy. Is it also their domestic policy? For people who might not have the privilege of sitting in your classes, what do you mean when you say China has a revivalist ambition?
So we know that China is one of the most storied and historically
Mm,
significant civilizations that have ever existed. It has a lot of contributions to science. At least
mm,
it claims that it's a center of intellectual power in Asia previously. But what happened was there was a century where, because it was more inward looking, it wasn't international. It was more insular. It was
mm,
invaded by countries from the West.
mm,
Um, so that's why you see Hong Kong invaded by the British, Shanghai also.
mm,
These port cities were subjected to the power of Western
mm,
countries. And so it calls that century of national humiliation. And so in the
mm,
history of China, it teaches people from a young age why the West is evil, why it
mm.
was the need
I
to
see.
revive the glory of the Chinese civilization that has
Mm,
influenced. It sees its influence to be extensive. That's Chinatown all over the world, things like that. But
mm.
China, of course, as we know, is one of the most important security threats to the Philippines.
Yeah.
So I mean, just to ano that to talk about its effect, that ambition, and its effect on us. Um,
Mm,
it chose to be more sort of belligerent uh, in achieving that ambition, that revival of the Chinese nation. So it is a political slogan inside China as well. It's the way in which
mm,
Communist Party of China gets support and continues its legitimacy, for its programs. But it's also a signal to the world about its intentions, what
yeah.
it wants to achieve for itself in the next few decades. So that's what
Mm-mm.
we mean when we say revivalist.
Mm-hmm. Siguro what not always, but from time to time naman, confuses me. Parang there's a lot of discussion on how China's very careful. Like you mentioned, in a way, diba? Parang how it projects itself to the world, how the world reads its stature in the global community. But then you have more recent instances in September where the PCG, the Philippine Coast Guard, said after Chinese militia came to Roswell Reef, you have coral destruction, and then more recently, Baho de Masinloc. yung blockage ng Chinese Coast Guard to sa entrance ng shoal na yun. No? Parang how do you reconcile that when China wants to paint this very positive image of itself to the world, and as it grapples kumbaga with how to manage, at least in the case of the Philippines, Filipino perception, how Filipinos perceive China. Like, how do you reconcile that when they're being so aggressive in the West Philippine Sea? At the same time, they expect or they want us to be closer to them.
That's a good point, because there's a consensus among scholars and analysts that if the world is now against China, it's because they created this for themselves.
Yeah.
It's because they alienated us, they bullied us,
Mm.
they weren't. To me, I did study in Shanghai, um,
Yes.
but I'm not pro-China. Like I'm anti-China.
Mm.
I,
Mm.
I believe that, as I said, it's one of the most important security threats
Mm.
in the country today. So it always says peaceful rise, peaceful
Yeah.
development, but that's the first part of Xi Jinping's presidency.
Mm.
Chinese presidents, they have 5-year terms. This
Yes.
is his third 5-year term, so he's going into its 15 years. So I
Mm.
think I mentioned to you also, because of this, he's now more confident in terms of power projection. So peaceful rise
Yes.
is not anymore the most important narrative inside China. It's really
Yeah.
ambition. It's really revival. It's really power projection. So
Mm.
parang yung peaceful rise is hindi na siya um, hindi na siya naging importante compared
Yeah.
with other
Yeah.
presidents in the beginning of Xi Jinping. So
Yeah.
I guess my point is there's really nothing to reconcile. I mean, it's clear that China you know is aggressive, and it's clear that China does not have good intentions at
Mm.
all.
Mm.
So
Mm.
that's something that we
Mm.
have to deal with. And
Mm.
for me, for us, people who talk about foreign affairs, people in
Mm.
government, what we really need to do is we need to have a separate China policy.
Yeah.
Something, a document that's systematic and rigorous, that's dedicated just to the study of China and what to do with China.
Mm.
We don't have that yet. We
Mm. Mm.
we 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 have problems with the way we do foreign policy, right? And I
Mm.
think
Mm. Mm.
maybe it's something we could talk about today or not. Diba? Parang
Yeah.
ang daming problema in terms of foreign policy making.
Mm.
So, I mean, if you want me to delve into that, I can. But yun siguro yung sagot ko about reconciling peaceful rise, but China is not peaceful. I mean, we're not in war yet, right? But
Yes. Yes.
at the rate it's going, it's not looking good. So,
Mm. Actually, I wanted to ask about the idea of alliance management. If you recall,
mm,
during the Strat-based forum, maybe
um,
it was just a few weeks ago, but at this rate, with all the developments, especially in the West Philippine Sea, it sometimes feels like years ago na yung time na yun. But before we jump into that, you also emphasized during the talk Taiwan. Kanina rin you mentioned that it's not just the South China Sea, it's not just the West Philippine Sea, but before that we have to think about Taiwan. You had criticisms towards how the Philippines is framing Taiwan, at least dun sa national security policy natin. Why should Filipinos worry about Taiwan a little bit more?
so Taiwan is there's a term in international relations. You call it first island chain.
Mm.
So it's strategy in when the United States was fighting World War II. And yung first island chain basically just looking at Japan, Taiwan, Philippines, no, as a way
Mm.
to project power in Asia Pacific. So the point is these are crucial geographic locations, and Taiwan is
Mm.
part of that. If Taiwan, so I mean, many things, many reasons why we should care about Taiwan. So number one is if Taiwan is invaded, is occupied by China, it will be
Mm.
easier to occupy the Philippines. No? If it
Yeah.
occupies the Philippines, so it really just
Yeah.
weakens our position,
Yeah.
and that's why even the islands in the West Philippine Sea, the artificial islands, it matters
Mm.
kasi ang lapit lang
Yeah.
nun sa atin. So
Mm-mm.
if there
Mm-mm.
are islands there, so the point is mas madali tayong sakupin,
Yeah.
and that's not good
Yeah.
for us. The second
Yeah.
thing,
We should.
yeah, mhm.
Yeah. Go ahead. Go
yung
ahead. Go ahead.
yung pangalawa, yung yung kung nagkaroon ng gera sa Taiwan, no, if the
Mm-hmm.
US and China goes into war, if the US defends, the issue is less about that we will be asked to defend, but the issue is that
You
we
won't have
will
any
be a
choice.
yeah, we will be a target.
Yeah. Yeah.
The um it remember World War II,
Mm.
the Axis powers, they attacked the bases.
Mm-mm.
No? So it might also be the case.
Yeah.
So we really
Yeah.
have to think of whether or not there are U.S. bases here.
Yeah.
We are and we will be a part of this whole
Yeah.
um, problem. So maybe by points we have to securitize the issue of Taiwan.
Mm-mm.
Yung issue,
Mm-mm.
pag sinabing securitization, it's a national security issue. It's not
Mm-mm.
just an issue of repatriation. It's not a social issue. It's not an issue of human rights or labor.
Yeah.
No, it's just a security issue, of
Yeah.
existence
Yeah.
of the Philippines. So,
Yeah.
yun lang, maybe, of course, OFWs are important. We have to
Of
protect
course.
100, 200,000 people there. We have to create a
Yeah.
program. But we have to go beyond that and see it in a comprehensive manner. And right
Right.
now, it's something that we don't talk about that
Yeah.
much.
Yeah. Kumbaga, it's not just a problem of bringing back home Filipinos who might be stuck in Taiwan, but making sure na kung saan man sila uuwi, secure
Oo,
din yun kasi wala
napapagdala
din.
dito eh. Dito pala mas delikado, di ba?
Yeah, yeah. Which makes me curious. Like, what are we like? Why is it so hard, perhaps, to communicate that to the public? I mean, I understand na parang West Philippine Sea. Kasi when you talk about the West Philippine Sea,
Mm.
you see our fishermen, our fisher folk having a hard time accessing the usual areas where they used to be able to find their livelihoods. What should we do in a way? Tips na rin to, no? Asking for the media, for for
Yeah.
politicians, for those in public policy.
So I have a lot of things to say about that. No? But the very first thing is I call it an epistemic gap. No? Parang
Mm,
we don't have enough appreciation for international relations. And it begins with
mm,
your college courses. I mean, kasi
mm,
tingin dito pag IS ka, tourism ka, o pupunta ka sa magiging FA ka or something, right?
mm,
So,
mm, mm,
the scientific study of foreign policy in the first place is not taken seriously here. You
mm,
see not a lot of institutions offering, a separate bachelor's degree in international relations. Very few. Meron naman, but very few. So that's
mm,
number one.
mm,
Number two, we've and that's also reflected in policy kasi we see the security problem as an internal security problem. It's good that President Bongbong Marcos mentioned during his last, I think, State of the Nation address, although I
mm.
have to check. Now we have to focus on external security. But what that really means is that
Yeah,
it's a recognition that the security threat is not anymore the communist threat, it's not anymore secessionist movements in Mindanao
yeah,
or things like
yeah,
that or kidnapping. It's about foreign affairs.
yeah.
But right now, because we relied on the US on foreign affairs so
Mm,
much, and we did not
mm,
see the China threat coming a decade ago, hindi nakahabol
mm,
yung sort of our intellectual firepower and our
mm,
you know intellectual appreciation for the issue. So
mm,
kaya you have a lot of great economists here who can advise the government, but
mm.
not nothing can be said about foreign policy advisors. And
Yeah.
in other countries, you have a dedicated foreign policy advisory board.
Oh yeah, yeah,
In the
yeah.
U.S., for example, you have external experts and many things about our institutions. But yun lang. So bakit hindi na communicate? Kasi iba yung what we think about international relations is not there yet. No, we don't appreciate it
Yeah.
that much. We think that it's
Yeah.
just consular issues like visa
Yeah. Yeah.
or
Yeah.
OFW. So wala tayo dun sa
Yeah.
security
Yeah.
aspect.
And maybe for journalists, it's also our challenge, perhaps, to make people realize na on the surface it might not seem like a gut issue, but at the end of the day,
Yeah,
um, security is a gut issue for everyone in
yeah,
the
yeah.
Philippines.
It's good that
Um,
some of our senators ngayon lang. Sorry, Bea. I just want to say that also na Senator Risa Ontiveros and the Senate
mm,
President, they've been active na in terms of foreign affairs, na recognizing that this
mm,
is an issue,
yeah,
um,
yeah,
more than just poverty and other issues.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
existence of the Filipino people.
yeah,
So
yeah, yeah. So, um, again, in talks of foreign affairs and diplomatic ties, a lot of emphasis has been placed on the Philippines leaning on to our traditional partners, aka Bongbong Marcos, clearly making it very clear to the world na Manila is leaning towards Washington D.C. again. We saw that during the official visit, and then of course the opening of more bases to EDCA. It's also been quite aggressive or quite public in forging new, or what he calls emerging ties with new partners on different aspects. For example, I can just recall sa EU defense ties yung pinag-uusapan. So, but you've also spoken about the importance and the gaps in our alliance management. So, what does that even mean when you think about alliance management?
so alliance management is simply a term to sort of create a plan or a program for our partners. So not all countries are our allies. In fact,
Mm,
the technical terminology puts a premium on alliance. The others are strategic partners and partners lang,
mm,
or maybe we converse with them diplomatically. But
mm,
the U.S. is one of the few countries that we actually have that's actually our alliance partner. So
mm,
anyway, point is, it's a program, to manage them, to make sure that they know who they're talking to, that there's clarity on policy, that
mm,
that there's also a plan to secure national interest uh, by really laying down how do we make these allies accountable, and partners
mm,
accountable. Siyempre, it's not a one-way street. But
mm,
they get something from us, and we also have to make sure that we get something from them, right? So magtutulungan,
mm,
basically. That's the point
mm,
of
mm,
cooperation naman.
mm,
So how do we ensure that the things that they promised will actually happen? And one of the
mm.
biggest failures in alliance management is during Duterte. Di ba?
Yes. Yeah.
Kasi we had a partnership with the US, with China, with
Yes.
Duterte and Xi Jinping.
Yeah.
Economically, di ba, we basically sold our sovereignty to
Yeah.
China in exchange
Mm-hmm.
for imagined economic benefits, right?
Mm,
So how did we make China accountable for any of
mm,
those things, any of the things that we
mm,
signed, diba?
mm,
So ano ginawa natin
mm.
to make them accountable for their promises? Hindi ba
Yeah.
kung ako yung presidente, napahiya ako sa Pilipinas, in-announce ko na sa
Yeah.
lahat ng tao na may
Yeah.
mangyayari, wala pala masyado, right? So
Yeah.
basically that's it. That's accountability. And
Mm,
we welcome the United States. The United States is very important in the region to ensure
mm,
stability and make
mm,
sure that the Philippines is safe. But at the same time, um, we really, for the sake of national interest, and I think naman the United States will not disagree when we say that
mm,
they also have to uphold their side of the bargain,
mm,
right?
mm,
So,
mm.
what are those things? How are we systematically making sure that we get those benefits? Diba?
Yeah.
So it's really a program, right? It's a
Yeah.
program. It's a plan,
Yeah.
to sort of a roadmap also. But you're right. Now, at the same time, we have new emerging partners. Now we're
Mm,
dialoguing with other institutions. But what do we do with those? No, I
yeah.
mean, what's our plan for those
Yeah.
individuals, for those individual
Yeah.
countries? For example, Australia. what do we want from Australia, from
Yeah.
Japan when we talk to them,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Yeah.
is it published? Diba, may plano ba? May roadmap ba?
Yeah.
Wala eh. Wala tayong ganyan. The
Yeah.
institutions that we join, diba? Like
Yeah.
OCTOS, the emerging quad, diba? These are
Mm.
all opportunities for us to maximize. But I'm not
Mm.
sure if we're able to maximize those, kasi sila na yung pupunta dito sa atin eh.
Yeah.
Kasi they
Yeah.
know the Philippines is an important player. But what are
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
doing to
Yeah.
optimize and maximize those opportunities?
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting kasi parang kumbaga they come to us but we should know what we want from them and we should
Yeah.
actually follow through with them to make sure that they give that to us as promised.
Yep.
Interesting kasi if you talk to Westcom commander for example, si Vice Admiral Alberto Carlos, he has spoken a lot about
Mm.
taking advantage or making the most out of the spotlight, out of the kumbaga the support that's been pouring towards the Philippines, especially because of what China's been doing against us in the West Philippine Sea. So
Mm.
I see the connections there.
Right.
Speaking of Admiral Carlos, kasi nagkausap kami kahapon actually na parang he was explaining because we were asking him parang sir bakit kaya din parang tila dumadami yung recorded acts of harassment ng China against the Philippines and the West Philippine Sea. And he pointed out nga naman na one factor is because we have been more aggressive in deploying ships, for instance, at least with regards to the Westcom. So therefore,
Mhm.
more Philippine ships out there, more chances for China to harass those said Philippine ships. So now I wonder, we see that we're more aggressive in pushing, or we're more assertive in asserting our rights in the West Philippine Sea. China responds. Parang kumbaga, it's a back and forth, cat and mouse game, tawagan ng ibang tao. So
Mhm.
where will this lead? Like, because surely this cannot go on forever and ever, right?
Um, good question. The truth is, we have to hope for the best.
Mm.
We cannot be subservient. It is very difficult to talk to China regarding the West Philippine Sea. They will not stop the incursion. They really,
Yeah,
whenever
I was,
you talk to them,
yeah,
ang sinasabi nila, bakit hindi kayo nagpaalam sa amin? Kaya namin kayo
yes,
win-order canon. But
yeah,
dapat sila yung nagpapaalam sa atin. 'Di ba?
yeah,
So, hindi, walang resolution kasi yung discussion is nandun na sa conclusion kagad na
yeah,
nasa kanila yon. No? They're not open to compromise and they're not open to talk about who owns
mm,
that. And kaya nga yung what we say, importante yung demilitarization
yeah,
sa West Philippine Sea. Yung lahat ng claimants may um, habang kiniklaim yan, habang hindi na-resolve, dapat we allow the presence of all the claimants there, or at least remove the military dimension to the West Philippine Sea. So, kung successful natin yung maitalaga doon sa Code of Conduct,
mm,
although we have to check kung nasa recent conversation ng Code of Conduct na nangyari, I think 2 weeks ago,
yeah,
yung demilitarization is important para hindi
mm,
matuluyang magkagulo sa West
mm,
Philippines. But in
mm,
the end, we have to just assert ourselves. And we can do that through many ways. So, of course, we actually have to go there, but yung sinasabing joint patrols, no? Importante yung
yeah,
joint patrol, presence there. The Canada just made its presence felt last week.
yes,
Those things are important. And um, I think in the next few months and even next year, we'll see those things happening more often.
mm,
You'll see more incursions from China, but you also see the convergence of other powers in around the West Philippine Sea issue.
mm, mm. In fact, actually, first week of October, joint exercises naman between the Philippine and the American navies. So that'll be another interesting development. Um, I know that you
Yeah,
just mentioned demilitarization, but you know,
yeah, exercise lang naman yan.
Yeah,
Okay lang.
exercises lang naman. Thank you so much for your time, Robin. That was a very enlightening discussion, especially nga yung mga topics na like especially like making people also realize how close lapit sa bituka ng mga diskusyon ng diplomacy, diskusyon ng security sa West Philippine Sea. Hindi lang siya kumbaga pie in the sky na topic.
Yeah.
Even if you're in Metro Manila, even if you're in Mindanao. Thank you again for your time,
You're
for
welcome.
answering
Thank
all
you,
my
Bea.
questions. And thank you for watching Rappler. Keep it here. Tatawagan namin ulit si Dr. Garcia in the future kasi for sure, malayo pa sa end itong diskussion on
Thank
how the Philippines is dealing with the world and how the Philippines is dealing with China. Thank you again, Robin. Thank you for watching.
thank
Goodbye.
you.